It's like, you know what? Just when you feel those moments of being put into the cage and told, like, hey, step in with us, that's to me where I'm like, I should be going against that. I want to be free.
Welcome to the Masking Tapes. I'm your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe. On today's episode, we're speaking with Oscar Romero, a community organizer and software engineer based in Durham. We'll be talking about how to show up in the community organizing space with compassion, a softer heart, how to also be building and sustaining the relationships in our lives, and the difference between being a good man versus being a good person. So, welcome, Oscar. We're so grateful to have you.
Hola. Hi, everyone. My name is Oscar Romero Jorge. I grew up in North Carolina. Originally moved from Mexico in Ecatepec is where I was born. I came out to the U.S. when I was 3 years old. I came here undocumented and grew up for most of my life without documentation status. I got DACA in 2013, and that changed my life drastically. I've slowly evolved into professionally a software engineer, and then community-wise, a community builder is what I think encompasses a little bit about the role that I try to do through an organization here called Somos Durham. I continue to be a brother, a son, and a cousin, as well as a friend. And just my friend once told me that we could strive to be community tios and tias. So that's one of the aspirations I have.
I love that. Thank you for just sharing this space. And I originally met Oscar in 2024 in Durham when I was down there during the election. And immediately the first time we had coffee, we were supposed to talk about the election, and we descended into a deep conversation about masculinity and men and role models. And so I knew that when I started this podcast, one of the first people I wanted to have on was you, Oscar. And I just so appreciate you sharing this space with us and just bringing your full self. And I remember one of the first times I went to your Somos Durham group's meetings, you asked the group to share something that they were struggling with at that time in the go-around of how people were doing. And I remember going home and being like, wow, as a male leader in the organizing space, to bring in vulnerability and like put it center and thinking about community building around that vulnerability. I was so inspired by that, of just the model that you shared with us.
Well, I appreciate that. I think from reflecting on that moment, we incorporated a balloon as well to make sure we had one mic to go around whenever people were sharing. And honestly, that I think was inspired from me also being away from friendships, trying to make new friends. I was just like, I'm feeling some type of way about all the things that have evolved at that point in October. I just wanted to both share that weight with my community and have my community share their weights with me. As I've learned, it's something that gets lighter whenever you share and people help you carry that. I, in Spanish, call it, as my mom has mentioned a couple times, everyone carries their costal, little sack. And that sack and costal gets heavier and heavier unless you dump out your rocks every now and then. And, those are venting, desahogándote, right, on drowning ourselves.
Yeah, and to share those rocks with other people to carry with you, too, instead of just holding them all in on your own. I think that's a good segue to my first question on this podcast, which will always be, what is one of the hardest things about being a man, especially right now in 2025?
Well, in 2025, I think how much we've diverged in what is potentially considered okay of how to behave as a man. I think we've diverged so much in different things. And as a software engineer, I'll make one reference that usually one single file that people can then copy and then make their own kind of mix-ups of remixes of however they want that code to behave. We've also done the same thing with personalities, right? I think at the end of the day, I always try to set as we are all different personalities, but we are given a template from that first version of what someone thought was the way to behave in society. It's diverse so much that I think for me the hardest thing is finding and aligning with the different men to then get beyond just a surface level conversation. I think that alignment is really challenging, where we all come from different experiences. We've been exposed to different challenges. Some of us have come to awareness on certain topics. Some of us haven't. And I think women have the opportunity that part of their template came with it's okay to share. It's okay to tell people the things that you're going through, even if it's just among other female friends. I think with men, it's both deconstructing the fact that we've been told not to share, and then to once you are aware of that, then you can start sharing. But then that's the beginning, because that's just the beginning piece of then telling everyone what are the challenges and things you're facing. So I think for me, to summarize in one sentence, maybe what the hardest thing for men is to align with each other. Where do we fall together as a collective category of human?
Wow. And what do you think that alignment would look like if men were able to figure out how to align? And just as one deviation there, I remember in college I had this realization that when I was having a really tough day, I would go home and my housemates would just like shower me with love and cook dinner for me, and we'd sit on the couch and we'd talk it through, and I'd cry and they'd like hold me and check in on me. And I remember thinking, whenever I would talk about, okay, what's the hardest thing about being a man, and some of the women in my life would be like, why are we talking about that? Like they've got all this privilege. I would be like, look, I know that when I go home, I have the support of this like strong female friendship. And I worry about all the young men who are having really tough days and going back to their houses and having to isolate or numb themselves rather than being able to share their rocks with their friends and them being able to carry it together.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about in that example as well, my college experience with the roommates I had, we didn't, evolve into that depth of relationship to express like what was going wrong, what was going stressful. If anything, there were some moments of where we'd avoid each other to the point where we just didn't enjoy being roommates. At least I think we both ended up being more burdened than coming together. And then the third year, I kind of almost disassociated completely from even trying, where I think I did a disservice to the people that roomed with me. I also had gotten to the point where I was like, I just got to focus on me, my lane. And at that point, I'd formed some friendships. My college best friend was a female, and she and I would talk and discuss and everything. But I also realized that men in the patriarchal structure that we live in definitely have a lot of privileges, but because of those privileges, we internalize many things that women then have to talk about and discuss more openly. And internally, you might not seem like it, but you are crushing, a lot of emotions away, and that is not healthy because human beings are made to feel.
Yeah, no, and I read somewhere that like the purpose of crying is not necessarily for yourself. Human evolution was to like make others understand that you were feeling emotional too, to be in solidarity and to support one another rather than to just cry alone. How did you go from that experience in college and navigating those friendships or roommate situations into building friendships later on in life?
Oh, well, I mean, right after college, I just wanted to be on my own. So I actually ended up getting an apartment by myself. For one, because I think the roommate situation had never been ideal. I did befriend someone my third year for the fall or for the spring semester where we became really close. And I think that was my strongest male friendship, that it was really cool to be goofy, very cool to be silly with each other, and then have like a couple of deeper conversations. So that was very fulfilling, and starting to like see how we could express those sentiments, not just keep it we had amazing Nerf gun wars in the quad against each other. We would just play with Nerf guns and remind ourselves that it's okay to be silly, it's okay to be children. And I think in a way that we are told as men at one point. I remember clearly, like in my teenage years, at one point my dad had to start like thinking that he had to tell me, like, only behave like this in certain spaces, otherwise you're going to be made fun of, you're going to be the joke of the crowd, and even adding the cultural dynamic of what Mexico looks like, in that experience growing up as a boy into the transition of man. And so for me, that was so healing to have this friendship with this person, that seeing how we could talk about more things, relationships, and just being closer at a level was like the blossoming moment my junior year. Like, this can be possible. Just got to find with who, with how, and people have to be reciprocal. And so I almost lost it, I think, that first year out of college, because I felt like I needed to focus on my career, I needed to focus on professional, and I was like going into work. I was hourly, so putting in as many hours as possible. But I wanted those friendships, especially in the IT department where I work. It's predominantly male, right? STEM is still predominantly male, which is the only usual way that they wanted to hang out was like, let's go out for a beer. I mean, I was taken to a gun range. Like, that's ways that people saw, like, these are how we're going to interact. I'm like, I can't talk in the gun range. Like, we're not talking. If anything, I was terrified being in that space. I was like, this is my first time holding a gun. And I was like, this is not the feeling that I feel powerful. This is, if anything, I'm like terrified of what could happen if anything goes wrong.
And so being in that gun range, but feeling that kind of fear and also existing in a male body, how do you navigate the contradictions there of the expectations of you're supposed to as a traditional male, like be excited by a gun range and then feeling that internalized fear there too? How did you navigate that?
I think I definitely had plenty of experiences growing up when I always had sentiments of like, this is what is being shown to me by other boys and men that is the way to have joy and fun. I had already experienced many moments where I was like, but I'm not having fun. I'm not having joy. Even like horse playing in middle school, I always somehow felt put off by it just because it felt very just both standoffish. And I was like, I don't want that relationship with my friends, right? I want to, yes, we can play around. We can like push each other whenever we're like in that relationship, but I was like, there's nothing beyond that. Like that's the only way you're interacting. And for me, that was always just hollow. And similarly, after like the gun range experience, for one, I had already developed these socialized expectations to not express those fears. So especially if I wanted to show up as like, oh yeah, you did that, you did a good job or whatever, you push yourself through it, puffing out our chest kind of aspect, whether emotionally, whether physically. But that to me was like, also going against what I felt like I initially wanted to do, but I think we put ourselves to this framework of, but what is it that society would expect me to do? And even talking to my sibling of like, that feels like it's pitched as a way to fit the mold. And as I've learned through the incredible book you shared by Liz Plank, if anything, I start seeing it more like a jail now, right? And why would we want to walk into a jail cell? Why would you want to walk into this cage that is muting your personality, muting who you are? So I think that's how I felt afterwards. Of like, dang, I just got to cage this up, and I can't tell them I felt this way. And then that made me less excited to hang out with them again.
Wow, that's powerful. And would you say that like norms of masculinity or manhood are more like that jail cell, or what exactly is that jail cell?
Yeah, I think it definitely is almost like you're taught that there's this fine figure, and I see games like shows like Wipeout where you have to fit some figure now, where you have to make the shape or whatever, and like that's what you're being told to do. Otherwise, like the people around you won't look at you in the way that you're supposed to be evaluated. And so now I see it that unfortunately, like we're really just putting the narrative of like you're putting yourself in a cell, in a cage for people to observe you and to be seen through whatever like the glass or plexiglass has on the cage around it to morph you into the shape that is maybe ideal for society, air quotes on that, where ideal, I think, is there's no ideal. And I have even been reflecting as far back as one class that I had that taught me that I think Socrates and Aristotle fought around what the ideal vision of a horse is. I'm like, it's just so hard to encompass that. Our imagination can go there, but to make it real, it requires physical actions, emotional actions that we can't leave it up to fantasy to get there, right? We work towards it and chip away. And so this plexiglass, this is on this cage, is morphing you and distorting you into something that might look right. It's almost like a house of illusion where you look right in one but look off on the other one. And so I think just evaluating that every time you feel this push as a boy to be told like you have to put down other boys so that you look tougher, so that you look better. Or, if you're crying on the playground, I remember this vividly, and the way guys pull each other up is like, stop crying, you shouldn't be crying. And it's like, what? When you feel those moments of putting put into the cage and told like, hey, step in with us, that's to me where I'm like, I should be going against that. I want to be free. And I think that's one thing that I recently heard. I look amazing, like trans feminist, and talked about how like this is our collective liberation. It's like whenever you're ready to heal, that's truly when you're healing for all of us.
Wow, that's beautiful to think about. How do you not step into that cage or that cell, but how do you also help others to step out of that cage and to kind of see the farce of this cage that is meant to be the ideal, but no one's ever reaching that ideal. Like masculinity is such a hard ideal to reach of who the ideal man is at this moment, and it's always changing. But I also hear your notion of fragility too of it, and this idea of it's something that you can be spending your whole life building and you can lose it in an instant in some ways. And so I remember just coming to the realization that I as a woman can walk around wearing pants now, and no one's going to question whether I'm a woman or not for wearing pants. But if an MMA fighter decides he's going to paint his nails, all of a sudden into question comes like, is he actually a man anymore? it's so, someone can work their whole life to be this strong guy and it can fall in an instant. And so I think I recently asked a young man who's new in the banking sector in New York, and I asked him what the hardest thing about being a man was, and his off the bat was, it's so fragile. Like, it's so easy to lose your manhood in a second. And so you're constantly trying to navigate and live in fear. But then he said once he had a girlfriend, he felt much more confident in being able to be seen as a man and starting to bend some of those norms. So I think a lot of it also, too, is like, how do you portray to the world that you are a man? And what are the actions you take that are like, I am man, for the world to see? And sometimes when I was younger and I'd hear men catcalling, instead of hearing them say their words, I would just imagine them saying, I am man, I am man. Like, that was, to me, they were performing manhood. And so it honestly helped me get through it, because I was just like, oh, you're just trying to show the other men around you that you're a man. Like, you're not expecting anything out of this. And pivoting a little bit, you mentioned growing up and your status in this country. How did your idea of manhood also coincide with the vulnerability of waiting to get DACA and on that path to citizenship?
Yeah, I'll definitely answer that. I wanted to mention one thing about the fragility of just even reading the book, For the Love of Men, was just that explanation of how fragile it is and how it's so much like weight to have to continue to prove yourself, that itself also drives us to doing really stupid, hurtful things that can be prevented if we weren't just trying to one-up each other. And I think the moment I realized, like, what am I trying to prove to you? And I think that also may be something that is rooted in my upbringing of my parents as well. And even with the challenge around immigration status of, like, I always felt like I had to prove something that I was exhausted by. And so I think seeing that early on, both with just not playing into the boy man role, was that I'm exhausted of proving myself to all these people. And so, like, that kind of made me snap out of, what am I trying to prove? Why do I care what you're saying? And even then, my mom as well, my dad had influence and instilled in me a sense of, like, you're doing this for yourself, for your family. You're doing this for us. Intrinsic value over, like, what is happening outside to give you that value. And so I think that made me snap out of a little bit of the fragility to challenge some of it. But even then, because society works so well around it right now, of, like, they uphold it because we've been socialized to do that, it was hard to still continue to go against the grain. And so in certain spaces, especially around men, I still default in a way to that unfortunate circumstance of, like, I have to really work to not just default to being calling out I am a man with the behaviors that I portray. I love that example of, like, yes, every time I feel like I'm going to default to, I'm just like, damn, I should just scream I'm a man and I'll be okay, because that's reassurance to myself.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's true. It helps with the reframing of things. It kills kind of the anger, the tension, where you're like, oh, everyone's performing something right now. What is everyone performing? And whenever I don't want to go somewhere, my mom's just like, just look at it all as a performance and then you'll enjoy it more. I went to a club one time and I remember looking at everyone. I was like, this is like Animal Planet. I could hear the, like, voiceover, and now the peacock flutters its feathers. It's like this kind of, like, dance we all do, and we take each other so seriously. And it's also like there's actually so much theatrics going into everything that we're doing in this world.
Yes, I think I love seeing that through, especially the other book that you gave me, Seeing a Stranger, and how it talks about seeing the wonder in each other, right? And even the wonder around us, of, like, the theatrics, like, be wowed from a sense of dramatic wildness and wonder. But I think that wonder of, like, how did that make sense and how you wanted to show that to the people. So I love that example that you gave.
And so going back a little bit to navigating your manhood, and then also going from a software engineer to a community organizer, what kind of spurred that journey, especially into a space that's not oftentimes, doesn't have a lot of men oftentimes in the community organizing space? How did you get there? How did you navigate your vulnerability and also your strength and privilege as well?
Yeah, and I think to your example that you mentioned earlier about your friend, once he had a girlfriend, there is privilege in that, and in conforming to some of the hetero norm cis men expectations that then give you breath to challenge some of those that I've been trying to also lean into. And with that, like, even in community building spaces, that I think the one moment, like even just kind of the small example for me was like I really love dangly earrings. For my entire upbringing, it was said like, oh, a small hoop was it, right? That's the level of
Yeah.
like accepted kind of expression of art on your body, in jewelry, or a really cool chain. But like, dangly earrings, that's too much. And so I think I did come into being more as married to my partner now of like, what can I explore that before that like kind of made me internally like
Mm.
worried about how people are going to portray me. Are they going to take me seriously? And it's so dumb that certain things, like even my ring on my finger, immediately changes how people may see me. But it is also working into those of like, well, now I have a ring. So immediately be like short circuited of like, oh, but he's also wearing dangly earrings. And
Mm.
it's still like an internal concern of mine as I challenge those things. And I think to your question around like software engineering to community building, I was so surprised that there wasn't that many people in the space that, given the privilege of what software engineering gave me, of like people gave me, like they saw me in this awe as technology seems to be this mystical thing nowadays. Once you get into it, you realize we're just writing a bunch of lines that some people make sense of or bother to take the time to make sense of. Some of them is deeper. Some of it is beyond me as well. When I made that connection as well, like I have nothing to prove again as a software engineer. It also made me feel at peace of over openly sharing when I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And so I think jumping into the social impact space with community building made me bring a skill that people were like wowed by and kind of gave me a little bit of, I don't know if the direct transition is like categoría of like un nivel de like, oh, pues, vas a ver algo. He's going to know something around how to help us. So that was a little bit of kind of like my in at the time to be welcomed more readily than I think sometimes the hesitance around what I now see of men jumping into community building is that hesitance to like, do they know how to behave? Do they know how to do these things? And I think that is a hindrance that I, for one, have been considering. Like, how can I be part of the narrative to help people be better to come into these spaces? Because there are things you need to be aware of. There are things that you don't need to comprehend, but you need to bring compassion. And compassion oftentimes isn't associated with masculinity. So we're not taught that. We're not socialized to express compassion to others. We're expressed to or taught to express caution and safety, security, and like that's nowhere near compassion. That's why I think there's a lot of issues, as you've told me, around if we can fix this one of being more mindfully masculine, we can probably solve a lot of issues, even including how first responders behave.
Mm. Tell me a little bit more about that, of how first responders can behave, and also how compassionate masculinity can be built.
I think just even showing up to a bar, you're chatting to someone, and I think the first reaction as a socialized man is to behave like standoffish, like vibe check of you showing up in the same way I'm showing up, or are you kind of different? And I'm like, you know what? I don't care if you're different. Just show with kindness and compassion. Get to know the person. And so I've been loving the 30 pages I've been into the See No Stranger, because it is somewhat of what's allowed me to behave the way I do, entering spaces, talking to different people, where I'm not expecting them to align with who I think them to be, but rather I want to get to know who they are. And I think that compassion of first responders is shown majorly when first responders of the same ethnic group. And then I think that expansion of that compassion to not just the person you visually identify with or relate to, it's just expanded beyond that, would help us challenge a lot of the ways that people immediately are responding to certain acts. The terrible police brutality experiences that people go through. I think it would be minimized. And we see that whenever it is someone of like a white police officer arresting a white person, you see that they express that compassion. We lose it whenever you don't have that. And I just think, yes, it would solve so many things if we acted from compassion.
And I agree with you. I think compassion could be a very different foundation for this country and this world if we spent the time to learn a little bit more about how to be compassionate. And it's going to take the work of learning and unlearning to think about how you show up with wonder instead of judgment when you're meeting someone new or you're encountering a tense situation. Who were the models to you of how to show up with compassion in your life?
For sure, my parents. I think, for one, my dad went through an upbringing where he saw his mom not taken care of as a person, right? Of my grandma having to go through a really difficult time where my granddad suffered from being an alcoholic, and so the challenge is about being mostly like majority single parent, dealing with those things of how my dad wanted to see more compassion for his mom, and I think he behaved as one as a son and continues to do so. That I think to me was a huge role model. And on top of that, my dad, I think, was able to identify both breaking the cycle, but two, identify that women are incredible, capable beings from seeing his own mother go through all these challenges that he then offered similar compassion to other women, and just the way he showed up for work here in the U.S., where he extended work to women in his manufacturing space as a supervisor, when to him, oftentimes he was told, like, why are we going to bring in women? They cause all this drama. They end up, fighting all these things from the male expectation of what they stereotype women to being. But he instead extended that because he was like, women tend to be more hardworking than men sometimes. And my mom, too, from an early age, in teenage years, she saw a behavior that she didn't want to repeat as well with her parents, of how it was made okay to be a womanizer, a man that just goes around and dates and gives you status amongst other men to do those things. And so for her to instill in her children, my siblings, was that be kind to any partner, right, that you're with, right? Be kind and understand that those are emotions and feelings that you're creating amongst a partnership, that you can't just go and date around, right? She was saying, like, these are girls that you have to think and consider. And then the core example she would give was, like, think about it as your own sister. How would you want your sister to be treated? And I think that immediately shows to think about it compassionately first about the person you're about to interact with. Right? How do you want this person to be, to feel whenever you interact with them? Do you want them to feel like crap after you end up like dating around and they find out that you were playing with their emotions? And it sucks to have that sentiment, right? I think thinking about it at the forefront as I was starting to become a teenager that was going to start dating, changed my like just actions and behaviors. I can't say I wasn't at fault. I still ended up portraying behaviors that boys are told to, talk about their dating situation and try to make it up to be more or date around. I was still like part of that situation where I wanted to fit into that. I wanted to set that status, but because that challenge or like that gift, honestly, that my mom gave me was giving me a different way to behave. So slowly, like trying to build up that muscle over falling straight into the cage.
Wow. And I love that you talked about both the role of your dad in this and the role of your mom in this, because we need women to step up and also model the kind of and help teach the kind of values of healthy and mindful and compassionate masculinity too. And a lot of women have also bought into these structures that end up causing harm because it's maybe all that they know or what they experience, but we are also capable of creating the next generation of young boys and men to be more compassionate and mindful and supportive partners and friends to one another. So I love that your mom had such a role in this. Oscar, you and I have talked before about the difference between being portrayed as like a good guy versus doing the next right thing and doing the work. And recently you'd shared with me a reflection from reading Liz Plank's book, For the Love of Men, and you said, quote, "I can't say that I am nor want to be on a journey to an idealized man character because of how flawed I see that to be." Could you expand a little bit more on what you mean by that and what you've found to be the difference between proclaiming goodness as a man and striving to be a good man?
I think inherently what it comes and reminds me often is like I am just as flawed as the next person, if not like we have different flaws, and those flaws are just part of our being that I think just hearing it express of it just is what it is, and how sometimes we have to own up to that is what I did. And so this idealized character of what I could envision becoming, I think it's just so far-fetched in how I can attainably get there. And almost might paralyze me into not even striving for that, right? I think there's often times when we see this big mountain we have to climb, and you're like, well, crap, I don't want to do that. That seems hard. And so even for me and my psyche of being okay with like every single day I show up, I try to learn, unlearn, and behave in ways that uphold the ways that I want this world to be. that I think, for one, is giving credit to me of like, that is enough. And two, is making it easier for everyone to come with me. Because if I go out and evangelize this idea of this is what you have to truly become to, be incredible and amazing, I don't know that many people will want to sign up. There will be some people, and I think even from my upbringing of Catholicism, that I think I find some challenges around the doctrine that it pitches around compassion and loving for all, of how you act on it versus how it's taught. I think, we're told in the Catholic Church that you're not trying to be Jesus. You're learning from the examples that Jesus left, and in portraying those examples of how Jesus behaved. And so I think, to me, that just stood out as a more attainable way and not a fantasy way of striving. It's like, just this idea of a pedestal shouldn't exist. We shouldn't idealize what human beings are. We just are. And then we behave in healthier ways that aren't causing harm. So I think, to me, that just helps me both encompass what I can do, what I strive to be, and also not fall, hopefully, into this act of like, psyching or telling myself that I am already a good man. I am already a good man because I do X, Y, or Z, or because I've done X, Y, and Z. I've behaved in these ways. And it's like, cool, I'm done, and then I can stop behaving as a good man. But rather just being good. And then on top of that, removing the layer of man, right? I just want to be a good person. And that takes effort and work every single day, how we show up.
Yeah. And I think being a good person then also extends to being a good friend, rather than, I just want to be a good man in the sense of opening doors and pulling out the chair when something, like the frivolous kind of gentleman ideals, rather than how do you show up as a good person. And I heard it said one time that this kind of chivalry of opening doors and stuff is not a bad thing. It's that as long as you're opening it for everyone, that you're not just doing it in the presence of women. And I think about that too, in the ways that a lot of my wonderful male friends talk about how much easier it is to be a good friend in a male-female friendship, but all of a sudden in their male-male friendships, it takes a lot more effort to check in on each other, to be like, hey, how's it going? How's your family doing? I'm going through a tough time. Can you help me out with something? And so I think part of that too is extending that. Instead of just a good man in the presence of women or children, it's how do you be a good man in the locker room where women or children are not in there too? How are you standing up to? And I think we live in an era of a whole lot of bullies who have made it such that with the broligarchy happening right now around the administration, where they are quite literally saying, like, come in and let's bully everyone else, and our unifying force is that. And so we have to take some tips from how you address a schoolyard bully, rather than pushing people away. It's actually like looking to welcome people in and building that community. Because I do think one of the challenges in progressive spaces is our mode of canceling people or pushing people out if they are not at the good man level, rather someone who is striving and working and changing. And I think that is something that if we want more men in these organizing spaces like yourself, we're going to need to be able to cut down some of that judgment and think about how we're going to work hand in hand to build this future together.
100%. I think even talking to how to remove the power and some of this brolarchy that's happening is really, again, just thinking, like you said, once you realize you join that exclusive group of bullying each other, you enter a group that's bullying you too. You just end up getting to the point where you then bully the next person in. And it's a circle of hazing that, for me, even around immigration status, I was like, we can't just keep hazing each other. We can't require each other to go through a painstakingly hard experience to then say, okay, I've justified my existence. I now merit being a U.S. citizen, merit being, in X, Y, and Z. Like, that just can't be our experience as human beings. And even taking, again, from a conversation that I mentioned to someone, like, we gloss over the expression, or like our Father prayer of, like, it says to make on earth what it is in heaven. And I'm like, why are we waiting until heaven to make this place better? We're just promising a better future for those that can't get it now, because we're upholding a system that is oppressing them, that is making them justify their existence by going through hardship. And rather, let's look at it from the perspective, like, let's make it better now. Let's not wait for then, and also stop hazing people, because it's a terrible experience to fear for your situation, to fear whether your family are going to be here or not, and amongst other oppressions that just are unjust and unfair, that I don't feel comfortable forcing someone to go through that. And in the same way of that recess playground, I don't feel comfortable bringing someone into the group and telling them, like, you have to do these hard things and put up with us bullying you before we give you respect. Like, that just isn't a good experience for anyone. If anything, we should receive and welcome everyone, celebrate them, check in on them. And men have these abilities instilled in them in a way of like being a protector. Yes, a protector to protect an emotional space of healing. I think just portraying these abilities in a way that still says like you can do these things, right? It's just a way of changing the space. We're not protecting a cave anymore. I think people are trying to force that as well and thinking that's what we need to do. No, we're protecting different things. We're protecting emotional spaces, emotional well-being. We're protecting our family and friends and younger cousins to have a safe educational experience. And we're still upholding strength in community, strength in checking in on each other through these things. We don't need to retract the abilities that we have been socialized to strive for. We just need to change how we're using them and how we're behaving with them.
Wow. I love that. And I think that it is the reimagination for our time of what it means to be a provider or protector that we need to do. That's the work for our society to do as a whole, because there is so much potential with that framing of how to show up right now for your neighbors as a protector by helping share rights, learn rights, show up as a body and protect one another in that sense. But also being able to be a provider of emotional support is something that I think is so key amongst men. As we see this loneliness crisis continue, whereby so many people feel so alone, and especially disproportionately amongst men, of thinking about how do you really think about being a provider for your friend group too, and for other men in your life that might be feeling that way. I think your example of hazing too, like it hurts my heart to think about that some of the entries to some of these all-male spaces, such as fraternities or to sports teams, is to put each other through humiliation, pain, discomfort, and then be like, oh, if you've endured so much of that, then we'll let you in to then continue that cycle on the next generation of people coming in. And I think that says a lot about where we need to go is we've bought into these systems because maybe you endured that before. And so you feel like you have to then project that forward onto the next cohort of people coming through. But how do you interrupt that cycle of, perpetrating what you experienced, knowing how horrible it was when you experienced it yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, I saw it just so much, even within immigrants, where they say, I came here and I struggled. And, I heard the story of a cousin of my mom's that came here when he was 15. He had uncles here, but they were like, you're going to learn how to cook on your own because we had to do that. And I'm like, you could at least walk them through it. We get better. Even animals in the wild, and I think we're still pretty much animals too, and in the sense of like existing in this environment of Earth, but they teach on skills to the next generation. And I'm like, where did we think that we were getting better by forcing each person to learn it anew? Evolution is the exact reason that we teach each other the next thing that we learned before to get better. And we're not doing that in the way that we haze people. We're if anything, we're just saying like, it sucked for me. You have to learn it from scratch. Now, after you've done that, cool. Then you repeat and do that to the next person. And we're not improving when we're forcing people to go through that strenuous process.
So what kind of advice would you want to share with other men of how to kind of break that cycle of the kind of hazing and also build better relationships? What are some steps that other people or men can do?
I think my biggest thing is I've come to realize some of the things I did when I was alone in that apartment, going through loneliness, going through being far away from my family, is to sit with it, realize that there is something you can do to change that. Insert yourself into a community space that will give you that healing by you working on yourself to open up. I think oftentimes the metaphor is that we've closed up the gate and think that everything that's outside is not safe for us. Because it hurts sometimes when you develop those emotional connections. It hurts to lose those moments, and you think that because of the humiliation, the hazing that you've been done, that the only way to get through it is to force those hardships, that tough time. And if anything, it just makes it worse. You get sadder, you get more alone. And so my invitation for people trying to enter community spaces is to realize that you're going to have to come in with a soft heart. I recently got some more piercings, and something that they told me is that, really silly metaphor to insert here, but that they wanted to see crusties because that meant it was healing. But we use saline solution to get the crusties to soften so that they would fall off. And I'm thinking around the same way of like these crusties around our hearts that we have as men that we've fortified with a bunch of, rocks and stones. We have to put our community of healing as the saline solution to soften it up. And then from there, work on ourselves to make sure we keep it soft, to make sure we keep it strong and resilient to help the people we need to help and help ourselves, but soft in the way that we're expressing kindness first. Be able to look at someone in the eyes and tell me where it hurts. And doctors do that all the time, right? And being able to express that to as well, like it hurts here and this is where I'm hurting, and being able to just have those conversations.
Absolutely. Wow. And being able to name those parts of you that hurt rather than just letting it engulf you is that power of softening to the point where you're able to figure out where it is that even hurts. So I love that advice of softening your heart to be able to get through all of this and to build better communities. So Oscar, as a final question, what do you love about being a man?
What I love, I think more recently have been loving, is that privilege of being able to challenge things, of being able to show up and being like respected from the patriarchal experience to say like, what if we did this differently? And having some initial like respect around that I know comes harder for being female in spaces of presenting something things like this, where I have that privilege, especially around men, to be like, hey, let's do this differently. Like, why are we just stuck in the same process? And having that initial respect of not being questioned immediately. And they're like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, you're a man. You're a dude. You could tell us that. And so like flexing into that for change, for good, and flexing that as much as I can to push the needle forward.
Wow. I love that. I love that. It's a privilege, and you get to use it and you get to exercise it. And it's a muscle that you'll keep building, especially, and that we can all keep building and showing up in ways that can transform our communities and can heal our communities too. Mm-hmm. So I just appreciate you so much for joining us for this second episode of the Masking Tapes. And I'm just grateful for your leadership and leading by example of courage and taking action with compassion. So thank you, Oscar. Un abrazo muy fuerte.
Igualmente. Muchas gracias, Carolina. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for making it through episode 2 of the Masking Tapes. And I feel so grateful for the vulnerability of community leaders like Oscar Romero in this time, where he continues to show up for his community, for all of us, by leading with an example of a soft heart, with courage, with compassion, thinking about, especially in this time where we are all carrying so many rocks in our bags, how do we distribute them? How do we carry them together into the uncertainty of what is to come, but also maintain our courage in the midst? And so I want to thank everyone for listening to the first 2 episodes of the Masking Tapes. Your responses have filled me with so much encouragement to keep this going, especially for the friends who texted, the people in their life asking what the hardest things about being men were. I hope this conversation continues to keep growing, and I'm committed, and we have so many wonderful guests coming up this season. So make sure to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. Until next time.